Welcome everyone to today's meeting of the Licensing Subcommittee. First, some housekeeping. If the fire alarm is activated, please take the stairs down to the reception area and out of the building to the green in Hawley Square, which is the assembly point. Please do not use the lifts. Officers will assist you and advise when it is deemed safe to return to the council offices. Filming of the meeting. I would advise that if filming takes place, anyone in attendance in the public area may have their image captured. I urge anyone filming proceedings to avoid filming members of the public, particularly if there are children present. Does anyone intend to film the meeting? No. Any filming or recording will not be permitted for any item of business where exempt or confidential information is considered following the exclusion of the press and public from the meeting. Mobile phones, everyone. Would everyone please ensure that their mobile phones are turned to silent and that they are not used to make or receive phone calls whilst the meeting is in progress. Now, looking at the running order of the agenda items, would members please note that items 4, 6 and 7 are part of item 3. They were only separated from item 3 in order to manage the publication of the confidential documents. However, discussion on items 6 and 7 will be conducted in a private session if the subcommittee decides so under item 5. Moving on to agenda item 1, apologies for absence. Are there any apologies? No apologies. Declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest from anyone? Moving on to agenda items 3 and 4. This is the full review of the premises licence for Dreamland Park and Buildings, Marine Terrace, Margate. Before we begin this item, I would like to remind parties present that this discussion will focus on the information provided on agenda items 3 and 4 specifically, which means we will not be discussing any restricted materials during this part of the meeting. We will avoid discussing anything contained in agenda items 6 and 7 for this section of the meeting. So firstly, please can I ask Miss Alison Brock, Technical Support Manager, to present the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. Following an application for a premises licence review from Kent Police received by the Licensing Authority on the 5th of July, an expedited hearing was held on the 9th of July. At that hearing, a number of interim steps were agreed. These are contained within the report. This meeting is to consider a full review of the licence for Dreamland, which is required under Section 53A of the Licensing Act to be held within 28 days of receipt of the initial application. The report contains a number of representations that were received from the public following the published notice of review. One person has asked to speak and is in attendance. Representations from police, environmental health and the senior licensing officer, along with some recommendations. Submissions from Dreamland, including suggested conditions. The subcommittee is asked to consider the report and make a decision based on information in the report and other information representations you may hear today. I would also like to remind the subcommittee that a decision does not have to be made today. You have 5 working days starting today to make a decision should you need longer to consider any of the information. Thank you.
Thank you. We shall now hear from representations of the Council, Kent Police, Dreamland, Margate and any members of the public in the following order. Firstly, representations from Kent Police. Secondly, the Licensing Authority, Thanet officers, Alison Stocker from the Senior Licensing Officer, Amanda Berry, Senior Environmental Health Practitioner, and Mark Davis, I have here as a TDC legal rep, is that correct?
Kent Police legal
Kent
rep,
Police,
yes.
Okay. Thirdly, from Dreamland Margate, and then under public speaking, we have Mr. John Moss, who is in attendance. All representations received, including from the public, are in the agenda pack and have been noted by the Licensing Subcommittee. All parties will then be able to discuss evidence provided in agenda items 3 and 4. Once concluded, I will propose exclusion of the press and public for any discussion on the restricted agenda items 6 and 7. So firstly, can I ask the police for their representation?
Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Councillor.
Sir, do you mind briefly if I interrupt? Apologies. Phil Cryer, solicitor for Dreamland. Council is having difficulty hearing everyone because obviously there's a distance. I wonder if people could speak directly and loudly into the microphones, if that's okay.
Can everyone hear me?
I think it's more online.
Yes, it's more the online problem, so
Okay.
we could hear you.
Mr. Colvin, can you hear me clearly now? You're on mute.
I can when you speak really directly into the microphone. I'm saying it's not the quality of the link, it seems to be the quality of the microphone in the chamber. I can hear you speaking, but I can't actually hear any words articulated. But I'm imagining if you literally speak into the microphone, that will solve that problem. So thanks very much indeed for that.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Colvin. I hope that you can hear me now. I'm sure that Mr. Cryer will interrupt if you can't. Councillors, I'm grateful for the introduction. As you've noted, much of the Kent Police material is contained in agenda items 6 and 7, so I, of course, won't be presenting that in any detail at that stage. If I may, by way of brief opening remarks, firstly, on behalf of Kent Police, offer its condolences to all of those affected by the incident at Dreamland on the 29th of June, following the drum and bass night featuring Worried About Henry, in which, of course, tragically, Emily Stokes died and a further 21 patients were admitted to hospital with drug overdose symptoms. There is still an active police investigation into this matter, and of course also a coroner's inquest, and that is why there is material contained in your packs that is restricted. The review hearing before you today is brought in respect of each of the licensing objectives: prevention of crime and disorder, public safety, public nuisance, and the protection of children from harm. Whilst this incident may have been brought about in the first instance by the events on the 29th of June, it is of note, as outlined in Dreamland's own submissions at paragraph 6, that a premises licence review was always anticipated to have taken place at this stage. That is why, as you will have seen in the submissions from Kent Police, and as we will come on to in due course, there are matters beyond the 29th of June included. Now, I'm grateful for the indication that you have read everything carefully in advance of this meeting. I hope that you have also had a chance to read the late edition of the proposed agreed conditions that have been provided. Those are the product of diligent work by those acting for Dreamland, acting for Kent Police, and acting for the Council. And on behalf of Kent Police, I do commend those to you. Whilst I'm sure you may have additional questions or parts that require clarification, and the officers here today can assist with that, if you're satisfied that those agreed conditions address the matters raised in the review, this matter might be dealt with in reasonably short form. I should stress, for the benefit of any of the members of the public listening, that the fact that conditions have been agreed by Kent Police with Dreamland in no way indicates that what happened on the 29th of June was not incredibly serious, but the agreed conditions represent, in the view of Kent Police, a proportionate means to address the issues that have been raised by this review. Unless I can assist you further at this stage, those are the opening remarks on behalf of Kent Police.
Thank you. Are there any other representations from the police at this time? Thank you. I'd like to now ask for representations from the licensing authority.
Thank you, Chair. My name is Asita Ranatunga. I'm the barrister representing the Council as licensing authority, so that's as a responsible authority responding to this full review. And Alison Stocker sits alongside me, who is the officer representing the licensing authority for today's purposes. Can I start by echoing the police's comments, firstly as to the extremely serious and tragic events surrounding the 29th of June, which is why we're all here, and I echo everything that the police has said about those and the line that's been taken. And as part of that, the council has been heavily involved in all of the discussions and meetings with the interested parties to discuss what should be done effectively. And we're here today, of course, to look at the full review, looking at what is appropriate and proportionate to do as steps that we invite the committee to take in response to that full review, which is the end part of a summary review process. The council as licensing authority's concern has been to ensure that, of course, the licensing objectives are upheld, primarily the prevention of crime and disorder, but also the protection of children from harm, given the facts and circumstances here. And specifically has sought to ensure that the conditions that are on the table, those that are put forward, are sufficiently precise, enforceable, and tight enough against that background to meet the concerns that the licensing authority have, and of course that the licensing subcommittee might have today. And it is right to say that we've been part of that process and have come to an agreement as to the list of conditions. But can I just note, I think, the first point is the police sought conditions as the appropriate steps to take in response to the application. And our that's the licensing authority's consultation response is on page 43 and following. That's from Alison Stocker. And we've used the conditions that were sought by the police and sought to review them and see if they could be tighter or could go further. And that is in part why you have the final list, so it's known as the revised proposed conditions, which are in your second supplementary agenda. And can I just take just a couple of points from that, just to assist, I hope, on the types of things that we've looked at. You may, I think, hear about this in due course, but what is proposed is what's known as a safety advisory group process through condition, by which interested parties, so of course the premises, but also the police and also the licensing authority and others, have due notification and a degree of involvement in discussing the events that are scheduled to come forward, with a view to seeking some consensus, but also knowing what's going on, so that tragic events like those that happened never happen again. With those conditions which have been agreed, if I can just pick up a couple of points on those, where the licensing authority is concerned is that those conditions are to a degree transparent. And you'll see in condition 2 that for each proposed outside music event or other indoor music event designated as high risk in accordance with a risk assessment matrix, the premises license holder has to provide a number of documents now through condition, including event risk assessments and an event management plan, which they must then implement. So that is therefore contained in a condition. And you might ask, well, what is a high-risk event and who assesses that? And that is down to the premises. But when I say one of our concerns has been transparency, we at least have, and I put it that way, a schedule or a table that's attached to this list of conditions, which sets out the broad parameters, if I put it that way, as to how risk assessments are undertaken and what the scoring thresholds are. And that is given over to the premises, as is right, and those thresholds are set. But one of the criteria, for example, is whether under 18s will be expected to attend the events. And that is one of the criteria now in that table, which is part of this set of conditions. Now, of course, there still remains how you score it and where it comes up. And that is for the premises, but that will then be notified through these conditions, through the SAG process, Safety Advisory Group process, so we will be aware, as will the police, that that kind of event is coming forward, and we'll have discussions on it. So it is a partnership approach to that. Now, of course, if that process breaks down in any way, discussions are had and points are not taken on board, then what is the comeback? Well, the comeback for the licensing authority is ultimately review, or for the police perhaps ultimately summary review. But that is the process that at this stage we've signed up to and we agree as set out through these conditions. That's the first point. The second point, can I just note, please, condition 3, which refers in more detail to each of those documents. And you'll see that 3C is that the premises have to provide an event management plan which shall take into account the event risk assessment. And the details of that plan include age restrictions. Of course they do. But that does mean that there's, right on the face of the document, transparency about what's intended for the process, for the event, given that we'll also have an event overview. And then you'll see condition 4, please, next, which is for high-risk events, we get 3 months' notice through the SAG process. So there is a lead-in time built into the conditions which allow for that discussion to take place. And then can I highlight condition 6 next, please? Documents are retained on a shared drive, so again, everyone can see where they are. But you'll see under that, it doesn't have a separate number, and perhaps it should, I'll just flag that. But all events shall be carried out in accordance with the event management plan. So not just having a plan, but you have to carry out your events in accordance with them, unless otherwise agreed. And here we identify both the police or the licensing authority being able to take a view, having heard what the premises has to say. And then finally, you'll see on condition 8, and I'm only just picking up a few points here, events classed as high risk in accordance with the risk assessment matrix will be 18 plus events with no admittance to those under 18, except with written permission, again, by the police or licensing authority. And that has been a key concern of ours. There was a concern, I just flagged this, about events which ultimately were categorised as low, medium or high, but along the way were medium, high or somewhere in between. We're clear now, and you'll see that it's high-risk events that would, by default, not be under 18 events. But if you look at condition 2B, you'll see that the event risk assessment has 3 distinct categories. So that's 3B on the first page. The event risk assessment shall contain an assessment of all material risks and shall categorise the proposed event as low, medium or high. So we have had, it's fair to say, some assurances about how the scoring system works beyond the table, all right? I don't want to go into those. I don't think I need to go into them for today's purposes, but I'll just flag that we have had those assurances. And with these conditions as written, we are content to endorse them and put them before this committee. So that's been our motivation and our position. I flagged the risk classification. Can I just finally just be clear that, of course, the SAG process is one that's necessarily reactive, all right? So we've set up that process. We do buy into it. I would like it to be absolutely clear that that doesn't mean that the premises or the operators discharge their responsibility to us through that process. It's their event. We're overseeing it through the SAG process, and we will discuss. But ultimately, it's on them. I want that to be clear. And if there are further issues down the line, the reactive process will be, well, we'll have to bring a review, or the police will bring another summary review, and we'll be back here. And we just sincerely hope that never happens. Unless I can assist you, that's our position.
Thank you very much. Are there any other representations from the licensing board?
Oh, sorry, Chair. I don't know if Amanda Berry's here for the Environmental Health Department. I don't know if you wanted to hear from her first.
Apologies, Amanda. Representations from environmental health.
Thank you. Environmental Health is a responsible authority under the Licensing Act and has submitted, just pause there for a second, has submitted representations given in Annex 7, 8 and 9. Given that this is a full review of the licence, it is right that we update members of the subcommittee on noise complaints since the licence was varied 18 months ago, which increased outdoor events from 24 to 40 each year. There's a small correction there because I think my pack says 20 to 40, but it was 24. Environmental Health made representations at the time. However, the licence was granted with several noise limiting conditions, including a limit on the number of outdoor events. 8 of those are at a higher noise limit and 32 at a lower noise limit. There is also a condition requiring a sound management plan to be produced by an independent acoustic consultant, which sets out a detailed noise monitoring protocol for every outdoor event. Dreamland has submitted monitoring data for review, and these have all been within limits. Complaints, as expected, have increased. You'll see that from the graph. And members should note that, as yet, Dreamland have not utilised the higher noise events. They've all been on the lower limit. And it's important to note that the higher noise limits are perceived as twice as loud as the ones that have already been had to date. In 2023, there were 23 outdoor events. In 2024, there are 34 events currently scheduled for the scenic stage. Dreamland is complying with the noise conditions, but compliance doesn't mean people will not complain. It should be recognised that 40 outdoor events will cause some disturbance and adverse effects to those living nearby. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. And now we'll ask for representations from Dreamland Margate. Yes, that would be the case.
It's also right in such a case that a licensing authority is asked to consider whether proportionate measures are being taken to avoid such occurrences. And my client, of course, takes no issue with the police for having started these proceedings. It's right that this matter comes before you. My client has always worked in close partnership with the responsible authorities in Thanet and is deeply grateful to those authorities for their cooperation in the planning and delivery of events at Dreamland, including the event in question. In its application, page 99, Kent Police say that the partnership between the venue and Kent Police has been well developed over the years and has always worked well to achieve joint aims, and that's a sentiment with which my client strongly agrees. In other words, my client and the police and all the authorities are on the same side. And it is again grateful to those authorities for their collaboration and care in developing this agreed set of conditions which have been placed before you for your consideration. In particular, apart from the event debrief, which took place on the 4th of July, there have been 3 partnership meetings to develop and discuss a detailed set of further conditions, and there have been countless communications back and forth to produce a set which we all consider meets the needs of this case and provides a responsible and practicable scheme for the future. And the way Mr. Ranatunga has described those conditions, I respectfully agree with everything that he said. Can I particularly endorse one point, which is an important point and is sometimes lost in these kinds of processes. The Safety Advisory Group, it does what it says on the tin. It is an advisory body. Safety advisory groups on the whole do not view themselves as approval bodies. The responsibility for running safe events lies with the premises licence holder. And that is a responsibility which my client accepts willingly and accepts professionally and with very great care. The reason that safety advisory groups exist is simply because for larger events, whether those are football matches, whether those are public processions, whether those are large music events, it's very important that there's a partnership approach to those events, dealing with all sorts of aspects in which there needs to be collaboration between the venue and the various statutory partners. And venues, of course, value very highly the advice that they get from the competent professionals who sit on those safety advisory groups. And let me just lay this qualification. While the SAG is an advisory body, woe betide a premises licence holder that doesn't follow the advice. Because if they flout the advice which they're given, they will find themselves back in a review situation. So it's a very important relationship. It's an advisory relationship. It's a partnership relationship. But at the end of the day, the responsibility rests with the venue. And that is something which is very clearly understood by my client. Can I say then some words about the conditions without getting into the details about what happened on the 29th of June? It's important that these conditions are seen in the context of the existing conditions on the licence. They supplement the conditions. They don't replace the conditions, with the exception, of course, of the interim measures which were placed on the licence by the subcommittee on the 9th of July. So can we just glance briefly at the conditions on the existing licence, which you'll find at page 19 of your supplemental agenda papers. And I'm going to take you straight to Annex 2 at page 19. It defines events with a capital E as outdoor events. Paragraph 3, there is to be an event management policy. It has to be agreed. There is an event management policy and it has been agreed and signed by all the relevant parties. There is to be a sound management policy. There is such a policy, signed in December 23 by all relevant parties. And without trawling you through all of the conditions, can I point out condition 8, which is a zero tolerance drugs policy. Zero tolerance means zero tolerance. My client does not or the importation of drugs into its site, and in that it stands shoulder to shoulder with Kent Police. It understands the risk that there are drugs out there in society, that it wishes to do all it reasonably can to prevent drugs coming into its site, and it puts in place very significant resources to discharge that responsibility. Paragraph 9, a drugs box is to be kept in the main office. Paragraph 11, an event management policy is to be drawn up, and it is drawn. 12, body-worn cameras are to be used on a selected basis. And then travelling forward, 18, a list of events is to be sent to the responsible authorities. And it's these sorts of processes which have been formalised further in the new set of conditions. 20 is important. It allows licensing officers access to the site in order to conduct investigations. So my client is obliged and very happily allows responsible authorities to come in and to investigate what it's doing and hold it to account, hold its feet to the fire. And there are partnership group meetings where any outcomes of these investigations can be discussed and any improvements agreed. I'm going to come and deal with Annex 3, which is all the sound management conditions in a moment, except to point to paragraph 7 of Annex 3 on page 23, which is a condition which the subcommittee added in February 23 when this licence was granted, which was for there to be an informal review in 18 months and by July 24 to allow for a later consideration of any issues that may have occurred due to the implementation of the new licence. This is to be an informal review and not a formal review under section 51. And quite apart from the very serious and important matters which bring us here, my client is very much up for that informal review to take place outside the aegis of this subcommittee, where other matters which might be raised can be gone into in more detail. And indeed, some of the representations from members of the public in this case raised a variety of matters, and those are the sorts of things which you may think is quite suitable to be dealt with on a partnership basis between the various authorities and my clients. And then coming to the new conditions, as I say, these have been the product of very great care. My client has listened to all the views expressed by all the authorities, both those represented here and those not represented here, such as British Transport Police, Network Rail, and so forth. And can I try to summarise it in this way? Conditions 1 to 6 are intended to create a sequential series of responsibilities on my client, which are fully transparent and everyone knows what the process is going to be. They formalise the partnership group into a formal safety advisory group to help to facilitate discussions about events on site, but also relevant off-site issues, including, for example, the interaction between my client's medical facility and the health services and the ambulance services, including the interrelationship between my client and the police, and then the police who are responsible for policing the railway station and the fence which leads onto the railway track and so forth, and also brings in any intelligence regarding what is going on more generally in the town. Kent Police were able to inform my client that there had been some strong drugs which were out there in and around Kent, and cognizance had to be taken of that. And so the SAG is a really good opportunity for all of these issues to be brought through into a formal setting, into a minuted setting of the Safety Advisory Group, to make sure that issues are spoken about and nothing is allowed to fall through the net. Conditions 1 to 6 are also intended further to formalise the process for development of event management plans, so that there'll be a form of cascading, starting with the events policy, then the events overview, then the risk assessment, then the event management plan, and then revision of all of that, if need be, through the SAG process. And in that, my client took inspiration from Network Rail, which made the suggestion of a SAG at page 79, saying that it wants to collaborate more closely with all parties involved and to be part of a formal forum where all parties can fully contribute to information sharing to help identify risks and share mitigation activity. And it's also right to say that inspiration was taken from the partnership group, which was also trying to head, or wanted to head, in this direction. At condition 2, as Mr. Ranatunga has pointed out to you, there's a risk assessment attached. This is at the instance of Mr. Sproats, who was concerned to ensure that the risk assessment covers all bases, and he happily is content with the document which we've developed, which has been attached. And then coming away from conditions 1 to 6, which deals with the processing of event planning, condition 7 adds to the zero drugs policy in condition 8 of the licence by requiring certain parameters as a minimum, which my client is very happy to set down and turn into legal obligations. The police were concerned to emphasise in discussions 7B5, which is robust signage throughout the venue indicating its zero tolerance drugs policy, and my client is very happy to endorse that on the fly. Condition 8 is a change which the police wants to see. High-risk events will now be 18+, except where express permission is given for a younger audience, and that express permission would have to come from the police or licensing authority. And then 9 is really a training condition in relation to security and stewarding. This already happens, but it will be formalised, and there'll be more documentation, and everyone will know what the training consists of. 10 concerns age verification, again principally relating to training. 11 concerns medical support at outdoor and high-risk events. And 12, I'll come to, it's the condition added at the suggestion of environmental health. Now, can I just add at this point that the Licensing Act requires you also to consider interim steps to take effect immediately rather than after 21 days and during any appeal period. So the way the Licensing Act works, any measures which you impose today don't take effect for 21 days, and then they would be further suspended were there to be an appeal, which obviously everyone hopes it's not going to come to that. And so Parliament has given you the ability today to review the interim measures and impose interim measures to take up the gap. And what we're simply suggesting is that these new conditions should also be imposed as interim measures so that they take effect immediately. So when you leave this hearing, you will know that that represents the legal position in relation to these premises, which binds my client. Can I then, before I stop talking, come and deal with the environmental health matters which have been raised, bearing in mind that environmental health have agreed condition 12, which we have added to the schedule, and are content with that as a solution to the case. And you'll bear in mind what's said in national guidance, which is that the responsible authorities are your principal advisors on the matter within their professional competence. So obviously we would rely on that. But out of respect to the representations which have been made, please may I say a word or two more about noise and environmental health. Now, as you know, my client's music programme sits as one of the foundation stones of the business planning of this venue, which in turn feeds in to the wish of Thanet and those who run town to diversify the audience coming to Margate. And of course a brilliant example of that has been the Turner Contemporary Gallery. And Dreamland has been a further example of that, by which, with council assistance, this venue has been transformed from a failing amusement park to a succeeding amusement park and general arts venue, including music. And all of that desire is reflected in the various strategic documents which we've set out in our written submissions, which I won't insult you by dragging you through, because I know you've had the opportunity to read them. Now, in 2023, my client applied for a license to lay the foundations for its future entertainment programme, including its music programme. On that occasion, it came before the subcommittee in February of 2023, and there were 14 public representations, which is a coincidental number because there have been 14 here today, out of, I think, the town population of 65,000 people. There were also representations from responsible authorities, particularly the police and environmental health, and the environmental health reps have been placed before you as an historical record. Following submissions from all parties, the subcommittee granted the licence subject to conditions, and the licence was issued on the 13th of March of 2023. No party appealed those conditions, and the licence has been in operation ever since. Now, it would be helpful just to take you to the relevant conditions now in relation to noise, and you'll find these at page 21 of the supplemental agenda. At Annex 3, the first relevant condition is number 1, which is that the licensee is to implement a sound management plan with robust controls for the prevention of public nuisance and compliance with licence conditions. And my client did produce a 20-page plan, which was drafted by Mr. Hans, who's online, who's a very experienced independent sound consultant. And that plan was signed by the responsible authorities, including environmental health, in December of 2023. It had to be submitted, says 1.2. My client had to abide by it. Indeed, it has. It can't be amended. It hasn't been amended. The operator is to maintain a sound log on event days. It has to record all the relevant considerations in relation to sound production, including readings at noise-sensitive premises, which incidentally includes Mr. Moss's residence, which is Arlington House. The log has to be made available to the licensing authority. And then, there's some very important conditions which come up from 4 onwards. And I just want to say a word about the genesis of those conditions. During 2022, there had been a number of visits by environmental health to Arlington House, including Mr. Moss's own residence, because he had made a complaint. And environmental health was therefore fully aware of the sound levels which were generated by my client's event. By the way, if you detect something in my tone of voice, I don't mean to, it's just where I talk online. I'm not intending any criticism of anybody. I'm just relating facts. Environmental health had paid a large number of visits to Arlington House and therefore had a keen understanding of the impact of noise from my client's events. So environmental health were in a position to give the subcommittee chapter and verse and to make appropriate representations to the subcommittee about what the sound levels should be henceforth. But they didn't rest at that. They went further and they took independent advice UK's leading noise consultancy, who are called Vanguardia, to assist them in putting a balanced position to the subcommittee. And based on their own analysis and their advice from Vanguardia, Environmental Health made a representation in which they advised that the correct balance for Margate and Greenland was 8 events at or below 75 decibels and 32 events at or below 65 decibels, together with separate measurements for base noise, which are called CEC. We don't need to go into the technicalities. And we can see that representation if you want to. You don't need to turn it up now. At page 39, in which Environmental Health also made suggestions relating to indoor noise. The hearing was attended by council. It heard from all parties, including Mr. Moss, who set out their concerns and their suggestions. Mr. Moss said then what he is saying now. The licensing subcommittee accepted the Environmental Health representation and made the condition at condition 4. 40 days a year, duration per day, and 8 days at 75 and 32 at 65, imposed on the recommendation of your own professional officers. And then all external events have to be monitored by a suitably competent acoustic consultant, and of course they have been. And then indoor noise levels are set up to 11 o'clock, 3 decibels above background levels. It's very low level indeed. And after 11 o'clock, 10 decibels below. So basically inaudible at night. My client produced a sound management plan, signed by all concerned, and that sound management policy, and that policy recorded, and I quote, that abiding by the policy means that regulated entertainment noise disturbance can be minimised to an acceptable level. And as been pointed out already today, if a concert takes place out of doors, there will be noise. And so what it comes down to is how often that noise will be, what the hours of the noise will be, and what the levels of the noise will be. And that was the balance which the subcommittee found after mature consideration of all representations. In this case, the Environmental Health put in their representation just on Friday, so we've only had a couple of days to deal with it. So I'm just doing my best to deal with it now, but it hasn't had the full consideration which it has already received in March of 2023. Now, since the hearing, my client has complied fully with the noise conditions and the noise policy. This requires it to monitor noise at receptor locations, including Arlington House. It has shared its data, of course, within the Environmental Health Department, which has also been free to check my client's data and to take its own data. And at no point has the Environmental Health Department expressed any concern at all, either that my client is failing to comply with the limits which the Environmental Health Department, recommended, or that it is, for some other reason, causing a nuisance. Now, you've been told this morning my client hasn't utilised the 75 level. In fact, it has. It's utilised it at a concert by the group called The Idols, and it received 2 noise complaints during the course of the night. So it is confident that it's not causing some dreadful consequences. My client needs the ability to run at 75 because it's sometimes in the hands of bands which it seeks to attract, but it's not setting out to get to 75. It just needs that ability, and it has utilised it, and very much wants to continue to have the ability to utilise it in the future. Mr. Moss's points, I haven't heard everything he's going to say, but he can't go beyond his representations because of the rules, replicate those he made 18 months ago that have already been taken into account in levels in the first place. Once again, you will have seen there's a small handful of representations concerning noise, as one would always expect in applications concerning outdoor music venues. And if you look at the environmental health records at page 41, and just look at the coding of those records, it appears that there had been 9 complaints during 2024, which on any view is an extremely modest number for an urban outdoor music space. As I say, my client received the environmental health rep last Friday and has had next to no time to react. Mr. Hans himself is dealing with a festival in another part of the country. Clearly, we submit this is not the moment to conduct a reverse ferret on the balance which was very carefully struck on professional advice by your colleagues last year. However, my client has taken up 2 of the suggestions by environmental health and incorporated them in the list of suggested conditions at number 12, which is sound management reports have to be made available to environmental health within 7 days of all music events, and also there need to be calibration certificates submitted to the environmental health to show that my client's noise measurement equipment is working properly. And I'm very pleased to say that the Environmental Health Department has agreed to that condition, which my client drafted. And of course, there is still the informal review contemplated in the licence conditions at page 23 to come. And so that's all I wish to say about environmental health, and all I can say in the public part of this session. Thank you very much indeed for listening to those submissions.
Thank you, Mr. Colvin. It's a shame we didn't get the question beforehand, but now I will ask, under public speaking, Mr. John Moss, would you come to the microphone, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For my own purposes, can I just clarify a matter on procedure here and check whether at this stage we are making submissions? Will there be a further opportunity to ask questions of the parties, or should that be done at this stage?
We're just going to hear your representation, Mr. Moss, the same representation you sent to the last.
Yes, thank you. Right, well, in my representations, I've dealt with a number of issues. Predominantly is the matter of noise emanating from Dreamland. You've been made aware that I've made a number of complaints over the years in respect of noise, and at the previous hearing, once again I was singled out as being the most prolific complainer. I don't deny that, and the reason I'm the most prolific complainer is because I am in direct line with the stage. The previous committee was told that Dreamland would continue to have noise at the stage at a minimum level of 95 to 105 decibels at that location, because that is what their clients were demanding. The licensing committee imposed a level of 65 decibels at any residential receptor, or 1 metre in front of any residential receptor, to be precise. You've been given details of the complaints that have been received in respect of noise.
Chair, I'm sorry to interrupt, and my apologies to Mr. Moss, but Council is struggling to hear, and again it would be helpful if Mr. Moss could speak directly into the microphone. That would assist.
Yes, I'm sorry, I'll try and speak a little louder and a little closer to the microphone. Within the package of paperwork that you've received for today is a list of the noise complaints that have been received by the council. I've totted those up to be 49 separate complaints covering 22 separate roads and relating to 25 events. I question the accuracy of the information that's been put before you, because during 2023 I made a total of 28 complaints in respect of noise coming from Dreamland. But as far as I can see on the list that's been placed before this committee, there is only one complaint that is registered down to me. It comes down to the number of the complaint that is registered, that's 20232150, but there are the 29 separate complaints that I made in respect of separate incidents of noise at Dreamland, where at my window the device that I used to record those noise levels showed that it was constantly in excess of those levels.
Thank you, Mr. Moss.
So I haven't finished, so may I continue?
I'll give you another minute.
Thank you. The other area of my complaint related to the language that is used at the stage events. Sometimes it's the lyrics of the song, sometimes it's shouting or announcements that are made by the actual artists themselves. Now, I have laid out in my complaint those words in full. They begin with an F. I don't think it takes too much guessing to know what those words are. I'm confused by the fact that those words have been redacted from the paperwork. If those words are so offensive that they can't be placed before this committee and they have to be redacted, then why is it that myself and everybody else that happens to be within hearing distance of Dreamland is subjected to those words on numerous occasions? I put in my initial submissions that it had already happened twice this year. It happened again on Saturday, where that word and variations of that word were used on numerous occasions, and it's being broadcast at very high levels of volume halfway across Margate. It is not appropriate.
Okay, thank you for your representation, Mr. Moss.
Thank you.
Your representation has been noted and it's been sent to the licensing board. And would the licensing officer like to respond at all? No. Thank you, Mr. Moss. Are there any questions for Mr. Colvin from the police? No.
No, thank you.
Are there any questions for Mr. Colvin from the licensing board and Mr.
No, thank you.
Thank you. Any questions from Environment Health? Looking at subcommittee members, are there any questions for Dreamland?
Just a couple, Chair. Thank you. We're really pleased that there seems to be a consensus with all the parties involved to bring this forward. It's really positive and we're really pleased. Just a few questions. SAG is a really good idea. We as the licensing board would like some feedback from all your meetings. Obviously some of it will be confidential, but it'd be great if we could have some sort of feedback so we know what's going on. In the review on the 9th of July for the preliminary stuff, so there was a ratio of 1 to 100 staff to customers, which the police suggested. So that was item 3, increase of ratio SIA. Security staff, ratio 1 SIA per 100 patrons for higher risk events such as trance, garage, grime events. That's something that we would, as the licensing subcommittee, would like to be put into the reviewed, changed licence, please. What else? Somebody suggested to me that there should be more female staff, security staff, for searches. Obviously, I know through football matches, if you're female, you can only be searched by another female security person. So is that something that Dreamland would be happy to do, particularly for high-risk events? In the paperwork that we've got, it says the security of the boundary of the Dreamland site seems very problematic in some areas, particularly with the access from the train station. I know Network Rail are trying to do something about that. So is that something...
Excuse me, when you say the other papers, are they papers in the public domain or papers in the restricted domain?
In the public domain.
Thank you, that's all.
So the security of the boundary of the site we're concerned about. Also, could we have an unofficial sort of review again after about a year? Obviously we talked about that before, when the review was first happened 18 months ago. So is that something that we could come together and talk about in an unofficial review, not an official one, but so that we know what's going on? Because obviously we have a lot of feedback from residents and other councillors concerned about what's going on at Dreamland. So any information that can be passed between us would be really helpful. Thank you, Chair.
Would Dreamland like to respond to the points raised by Councillor Huxley? Mr. Colvin, can you hear me?
So if I look like I'm not paying attention, I'm paying great attention. I actually... like a very good idea to me that you should be kept informed. This is, I'm presuming, your main music venue in the town. And what you could do, I'm not sure you actually need it to be conditioned, but what you could do is to just note that a report should be brought in front of the licensing committee on a periodic basis, so that all the councillors on the committee can understand what's going on at Dreamland, which is obviously an important premises for the town. On the question of an informal review, there will be obviously safety advisory group. What is sometimes is written in as a condition is that there, particularly for big festivals, is that there should be an event debrief. So at the end of Glastonbury, for example, there would be an event debrief where all the partners on the safety advisory group come together and discuss all their experiences with the premises licence holder. In this case, there are monthly meetings at the SAG, so you could just trust it to the SAG to make sure that at the end of a season or the end of any particular high-risk event, there is an event debrief. But you could write in that after high-risk events, there should be an event debrief through the SAG. You could do that if you want to do that, and I have no reason to want to stop you doing that. There's currently, on the licence, a provision for informal review to take place by July of 2024. And I think there was even a date set for that review before the tragic incidents which bring us here. What you could do is to push that back a little and to vary the condition to say it should take place, say, by October 2024, so that there is a review at the end of the summer season. You could also, if you wanted to, and again I'm speaking without instructions, you could make that informal review annual. So all of those are perfectly open to you if you want to ensure that there is proper oversight of not just what is going to happen, but what has happened. Event debriefs, please don't do it for every event because it'll overtax the safety advisory group. But you could decide there should be a specific event debrief for high-risk events. You could decide there should be an informal review at the end of each summer season, and you can just decide without conditioning it that the licensing committee is to have overview. So far as female-male ratios of security guards is concerned, this is a matter for the risk assessment. In an ideal world, I guess you'd have 50-50 for everything on an equality basis, but I'm afraid that female security guards are quite difficult to come by. And you might end up imposing a condition by creating an artificial ratio which no venue can actually comply with. However, there are jobs which are specifically jobs for females, including, for example, pat-down searches of women which have to be done by women. If the risk assessment says, well, somebody should go in and outside the toilets to make sure that everything is happening fine there, that's another thing. If there's a particularly high percentage of women attending the event or younger women attending the event, then the risk assessment would then set a level. So I would just try to dissuade you from micromanaging the ratio of male to female door supervisors, but my client has that well in mind, as will its statutory partners. And for exactly the same reason, it was a good condition to add, before all the parties had had the opportunity to speak about it, to say 1 to 100, but it's a fairly blunt instrument in the grey run of things, because it isn't just a number which is plucked as a fraction for the event. Oh, there's 5,000 people attending, therefore 50 security. What my client has to do is to work out what the functions are. How many search lanes are there going to be? On the search lane, are there going to be wands? Is there going to be a pat-down? Is there going to be a search arch? What are we going to do in terms of spotters? What are we going to do in terms of welfare? What are we going to do about perimeter control? Are we going to use drug dogs? Are we going to use patrol dogs, etc., etc.? So the number is actually built up for every event and is set out in detail, as it was indeed for 29th of June, on the event management plan. It's not a bad idea sometimes for new nightclubs, that sort of thing. So, well, it's a 2,000 capacity nightclub, there should be 20 security, without actually specifying deployments. But in my client's venue, every single person has a job, and every single place within the premises has security. It's just a question of the specialisms and so forth. So we would try to dissuade you, if we might, from imposing an artificial 1 to 100 or 1 to 150 or whatever it is. This is something which can be left to the parties in discussion in the safety advisory group. I think that covers all the points. If I've missed something, I apologise.
Councillor Huxley.
Yeah, sorry, just one about the security of the boundary of the site.
The security, so sorry.
The boundary of the site of Dreamland. Because there's people can apparently access it via the train tracks from the station, and they throw drugs over the boundary fence, according to various people.
Sorry. I don't know whether you want me to deal with this in part 2 or whether you'd like me to cover that now.
We could deal with that in part 2.
Okay, I'll make a special note.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Colvin. Any more questions from the subcommittee? Any more questions to Mr. Colvin?
No, thank you.
We shall now pause discussion as we move on to agenda item 5, exclusion of public and press. The exclusion report refers to documents in agenda items 6 and 7. These items are to be considered along with the information provided for items 3 and 4. However, due to the confidentiality of the evidence provided for items 6 and 7, we are proposing the exclusion of the public and press now. Please can I have a member to propose? Thank you.
Second it?
Second.
And all three of you agree?
Agreed, yeah.
Okay, so just
Thank
say
you.
Pause proceedings and turn off the live stream
Okay.
and obviously empty the room.
Okay, I'll now pause the meeting. Thank you.
Just at this stage, while public is still present, it may be useful to summarise. I don't think anything's contentious here, but the basis on which the committee will reach its decision, that's to say the advice that I will give and am now giving the committee. This is a full review of the licence, although it was triggered under section 53A, and therefore encompasses all the licensing objectives. In that respect, the committee must consider the evidence presented, that being the written evidence, the spoken evidence, and representations from the public. If on the basis of that evidence the committee consider that one or more of the licensing objectives is undermined, they then have to consider what action to take and whether or not an appropriate condition might remedy that situation. In that context, as Mr. Colvin has mentioned in the context of environmental health, the committee are entitled to consider in particular the evidence of responsible authorities, which includes the Environmental Health Department, but in particular the police in respect of crime and disorder. So in that context, the evidence presented by the police and the environmental health, the committee is entitled to consider that as, in particular, as a source of advice. Other than that, I have no particular comments, but if I have said anything that any of the council disagree with or object to, then please speak up. I'm assuming that includes Mr. Colvin that has no objections to that advice.
I think I'm happy with that advice.
Okay, thank you. I just thought it appropriate that while the public and press are here, they could hear the basis. Yeah, they could hear the basis of the advice that will be given as to your decision.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Could the chamber now be cleared? Thank you.
I have to say, subject to what any council may say, I'm not sure there's a specific power granted to those who make representations to question the parties, unless the parties are happy to receive such questions.
But may I just say, Mr. Ranatunga, I understand the position is that that would never be direct questions. It would always be through the chair and through the committee. It's not a formal court hearing.
Yes.
If there are questions, they'd be raised really through a discussion process and through you, Chair.
Well, can I take some advice from Alison here? Because,
I don't know if I could just add, Chair. Just obviously, it's your hearing, and it is meant to be an informal process. But you dictate what you want to hear about, and it is open to this committee, as you have done, to time limit matters and to restrict matters as you see fit.
I'm happy for Mr. Moss to ask his question.
I could just to summarise Mr. Asita's position, that I think that would be that whether these questions are formally asked by the chair will be in the discretion of the subcommittee. Thank you. Yes, I think the point being made is that you've formally adjourned or paused the meeting, and it needs to be recommenced.
I'll just reopen the meeting to hear from Mr. Moss. Do you submit your questions now, Mr. Moss?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. What readings have been taken by the Council in respect of noise levels generated by Dreamland? And from what premises have those readings been taken? And what were the results?
What dates would these be?
At whatever dates they may have taken place by the Council.
We can either answer these questions now, if possible. The questions were probably directed at environmental health, or we can get back to Mr. Moss at a later date.
Dreamland submits sound logs for all their events, and they are scrutinised by environmental health, so they're all reviewed.
And could we send this information to Mr. Moss?
I have no objection to it. I don't know if Dreamland are okay with that.
Mr. Colvin, are you happy with that for the logs to be sent to?
I think I heard that Mr. Moss would be sent the information which he has requested. That was the answer that was just given by the officer. I'm sorry if I didn't hear too well. I have no objection to Mr. Moss being sent the council sound readings. Mr. Moss would be entitled to FOI the sound readings. In any case, it would be quite surprising for the council to reject it. It could reject it because it was part of some sort of investigation, but I don't think it would. So I would have no objection to Mr. Moss being sent the council sound readings. Why not?
And these would be on different dates.
Dreamland carry out noise monitoring for all events and submit those logs to us. That's been tidied up with the condition today, so that information, providing Dreamland are happy, have no objection. If we determine that today, then I'm happy to forward that on.
And how far back would we send these logs?
Since the variation on the last licence.
Yes.
Instructions about that. The readings which are taken by a public official are not the same as readings which are taken by a commercial operator. Can I just have a little while to think about that with my side? It's not normal for sound logs to go out there, highly technical documents, they contain a huge amount of data, and for them just to become generally publicly available. I'm not quite sure about. What we can do perhaps is to find a means with the council. I'm being told that this is normally treated across the country as confidential information for the operator, which they're required to share on a regulatory basis with their regulatory authority, which is environmental health, for which they're not obliged to share with members of the public as a whole. I'm also hearing from Mr. Hans, who does this all over the country, who says this is not regular and is not something which we should agree to. But if our readings show that we're breaching, or
could I perhaps assist?
They do their own readings and find that we're breaching, which we're not, then the council's own readings are FOIable and can be given to Mr. Moss. But our own data, I'm afraid, we wouldn't be happy to share with the public as a whole.
Could I just clarify that as far as I was understanding, Mr. Moss's question was what readings had the local authority taken, from where, and from what premises, and the results thereof. So,
and I have no problem with that at all.
you know, I mean, if any have been taken, then there's no problem with that information being given to Mr. Moss.
Can I just answer that, because I am here to assist environmental health as well. Of course it's right that the council could be FOI'd, freedom of information request for that sort of information, which would then be appropriately redacted and produced, and that can happen. We can do that. I don't really think that's, it's a question that's been raised through this discussion format, but beyond that, we're here, we can try and provide an answer to that, but I don't really see that that's something appropriate for this committee to engage in beyond noting it, if I could say, because just to fit where that comes in, it may be that officers have gone and taken readings. That has informed the position that environmental health have taken before you today, which is to get clear and precise conditions on the licence, and that's what they endorse. So it's part of the process. Of course, if an individual resident wants to seek that information, they can do through FOI anyway, but I don't really see how we need to go any further than noting that for today. That would be the position.
Yeah, can I suggest, out of courtesy, environmental health rights to Mr. Moss with further information?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. That was my question in the outset, was directly related to the noise readings that had been taken by the council, where and when. My second question is of Dreamland, a similar question in respect of the locations at which they have taken their readings. And that question is asked in the light of the condition within the licence that requires the noise to be measured 1 metre from the facade of a residential premises. Now, I know that Dreamland has been taking readings in the car park, the residence car park, which is not 1 metre in front of a residential receptor, and that, as I've said in my initial written submissions, that Dreamland has refused to come to my flat and take readings of the level of noise that is actually received at my flat window. And I believe that that information is something which the committee should take into account before it makes its decision, because it is my firm belief, and based on the evidence that I've taken readings at my own window, that the noise condition is being frequently abused. Thank you.
Are you able to respond to that, Mr. Colvin?
Do my best. You do end up in a situation with outdoor music events where operators required to take readings 1 metre from the facade of noise-sensitive receptors. Those noise-sensitive receptors may be a bungalow, they may be a house where the bedroom is upstairs, maybe a maisonette, it may be a block of flats. It's not practical for the operator to take noise readings 1 metre from someone's window if they're on the 5th floor. And therefore, noise readings are always taken from the noise receptor at ground floor level. And of course, if there were a case to be made that the noise conditions were different at some other level in the apartments, it's always open to the resident to ask the council to go and do a reading upstairs. But that doesn't affect the obligation on the operator. My client is fully compliant with its conditions by taking the noise reading at the ground level. Can I just add to that, if I may, something which Mr. Moss said before, which was his reading showed different readings. There are two reasons for that. The first is that he will not be using properly calibrated equipment. And the second is that what he's reading is the overall noise. What my client's meters read is the music noise level, which is the level from the noise. In other words, my client takes a background level and then works out through its technical equipment what the music is adding to the background level. Mr. Moss won't have access to equipment which can actually separate out noise sources in that sort of way. But the way my client is complying with this condition is the way that this condition is complied with all over the country in many hundreds, if not thousands, of sites.
Thank you. Any further from you, Mr. Moss? Thank you. In that case,
Before the exclusion, just reiterate the exclusion date.
yeah, this moving on to agenda item 5, exclusion of public and press. This exclusion report refers to documents in agenda items 6 and 7. These items are to be of the evidence provided for items 6 and 7. We are proposing the exclusion of the public and press now. I have a proposer in a second.
Yeah, we've already done it, so you don't have to.
Okay, I'd like to now pause the meeting while we exclude public and press. Could we clear the chamber, please? We're just going to take a 5 or 10 minute break before we move on to agenda items 6 and 7.
It'd be great, wouldn't it?
I mean, we've got quite a lot of work.
The live stream will be resumed once the private section, agenda 6 and 7, has been completed. Thank you. Welcome back, everybody. I'd like to open the debate again regarding agenda items 6 and 7. This pertains to the full review of the premises licence for Dreamland Park and Buildings, Marine Terrace, Margate. questions?
Could I just make the point that, unless I'm grossly mistaken, I think the guidance does point out that what occurs outside the vicinity of the premises. Sorry. Yeah. Sorry, I thought it was.
I don't know if I could... Oh.
Thank you all very much. I will now close the section of the debate regarding the restricted items, Agenda 6 and 7. With the exception of the subcommittee members, the Democratic Services Lawyer, Officer and the interim senior litigation lawyer, please can I ask those present to leave the council chamber so that the subcommittee can come to a decision. You will be invited back for the decision to be announced. The Pugin room has been booked for the Dreamland and police reps to go to. This is on the first floor, just 2 floors directly below the council chamber. A council officer will accompany you there. Could we clear the room, please? Thank you. Thank you everyone, and for the public watching on the live stream. I would like to now invite Mr Hodkinson, the interim senior litigation lawyer, to read a summary of the subcommittee's determination.
Thank you. The committee has considered the evidence presented by way of written representations and oral representations at the hearing, and in response to questions. The committee has had regard to the licensing objectives, the statement of licensing policy, the Section 182 guidance, and the summary review guidance. The committee has conducted the review as a full review of the licence, acknowledging that the process was originally started under Section 53A of the Licensing Act 2003. In turn, this means that the committee are obliged to consider the evidence in the context of all 4 licensing objectives. The committee is required to consider whether the evidence suggests that one or more of the licensing objectives is being undermined. In this context, the committee bear in mind that they are entitled to view the police and the environmental health as sources of advice in respect of crime and disorder and public nuisance respectively. With regard to crime and disorder, the committee accepts that instances of crime and disorder have occurred. In particularly, on the 29th of June, there was an event at which 1 person died, 1 person was put in an induced coma, and 21 others received hospital attention for ingesting drugs. Although high risk, under 18s were admitted to this event. This incident alone would warrant, in the committee's view, a summary review under Section 53A of the Licensing Act 2003. In the context of noise nuisance, the committee note the evidence of Mr Moss. Although Mr Moss was clearly aggrieved, the committee did not have the benefit of any precise sound measurements from Mr Moss, but the committee note that there have been other complaints. The number of complaints justify the committee's finding that there is reason to believe that the licensing objective of prevention of public nuisance is being undermined. However, the committee is required in both contexts to consider whether or not conditions would remedy this. The committee in that context note that it is entitled to look to the environmental health and police reports as sources of advice in their capacity as responsible authorities. The committee has been presented with a set of agreed conditions, that is to say, agreed by the police, Dreamland and Thanet District Council. In addition to those written conditions, Mr Colvin for Dreamland proposed an additional condition to be 3C14, that event management will specifically cover border security. Given that these conditions are agreed and supported by the police, Dreamland and environmental health, the committee is satisfied that these conditions will effectively address those matters that have been aired at this review and which have concerned the committee. We are also satisfied, the committee is also satisfied that in this context these conditions are proportionate. The committee notes in particular the cooperation of Dreamland has given to the responsible authorities, in particular the police. The committee's decision is to amend the licence by including the agreed conditions. In addition, the committee imposed these conditions as interim measures pending expiry of the time for appeal or the determination of any such appeal. And that is the decision of the committee.
Thank you, Mr Hodkinson. That will conclude the proceedings for this licensing subcommittee meeting. Thank you all very much. I close the meeting at 4:35.
Are you